Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lance. I'm a product specialist here at LabKey. So as we kind of get the poll answers going through, I'll kind of just give an overview of what we're going to be covering today. It's great to see some familiar faces. But really, I'm here to help different labs or organizations evaluate Sample Manager to see if it's the right fit for them. I also help labs get fully onboarded and implemented with their new system to make sure that they have all those support, and we can help get that historical data from whatever previous system they have into their system. So today we're going to lean into the spooky vibes of October, talk about some lab horror stories and how we can prevent them with a demo of Sample Manager. For a little bit of background, before LabKey, I was a lab tech and an account manager for an infectious disease laboratory. There, I've worked with different LIMS, Excel spreadsheets, and paper records, so I'm really familiar with the pros and cons of each system. This makes me really excited about Sample Manager because I can see how these different systems come together and how we can help labs improve their sample management in major ways and prevent a lot of these horror stories we'll be talking about today. So we'll briefly discuss what to consider when looking at a sample management system, who LabKey is as an organization, and we'll dive into that demo of Sample Manager. And we'll look into all the different ways we can prevent your own lab horror story. So let me know what kind of samples you work with in the chat, and then we'll kind of get going from there. And we'll kind of look at the poll too once we get to that slide. So what are some common horror stories when working with a laboratory? Well, when I think about when I was working with different systems in the lab, a lot of it had to do with spreadsheets. It's so easy to accidentally delete or alter metadata in your spreadsheets, and it's super hard to collaborate with others that are working together in the lab. It's hard to know where everything is and keep everything up to date because of that. Um, but with your spreadsheets, what might be the most terrifying thing is that once it gets to a certain size, it starts to crash, it starts to freeze. And when that happens, you don't always know if it saved all the work you just did and if you have to go back and redo it. And that really sucks when you have to do it. And then working in the lab, it was also scary when you couldn't find a sample that you really needed in a pretty fast way if you had like some urgent testing you needed to get done. Maybe that spreadsheet you were using to track where your samples is it wasn't updated, so that can be really difficult. Or maybe the limbs you work with is hard to use, so people don't accurately mark where their samples are, or it's just difficult to kind of know where to search for them in that system. But maybe what might be the most terrifying horror story for when I worked in the lab was when our freezers died. That was always terrifying, and it was a mad scramble to try to get all of our samples out of that dying freezer into another one. Updating our LIMS system was difficult for all of those samples that we had to do, and in a spreadsheet, it'd be near impossible. So when looking at Sample Manager, we'll look at how we can move entire boxes or entire shelves out of a freezer into another one, making sure that data loss it won't happen and that you can always keep everything up to date and know exactly where your samples are. So along with that, there's a lot of other ways we can kind of look at Sample Manager and preventing those horror stories and hopefully making your workflow processes a bit smoother. So what should we be looking at when picking the right software? First, you need to know what features are important to you and what your requirements are. And that's kind of what this poll is kind of getting at. You need to know sample tracking, freezer management, workflow management. You need to know what does your lab do? Is it just a biobank where you're storing samples? Are you doing testing? Uh, and then you'd also need to know how is your lab structured? Do you have different sections or different testing sites that you need to kind of divide all of your samples up between? Do you have a lot of different sample types? And do you need to customize or configure that data to be different for each sample type? And do you need something that's really easy to use with very little training? A lot of limbs are complex. That can make it very difficult to use and very difficult to train new users, especially if you're in an academic setting where students are coming and going. You want something that's easy to pick up. And then once you have that key list, you can go look at different vendors and see how they compare. When looking at vendors, a lot of our current clients have said that what really stood out between the different vendors was their responsiveness. How fast were they getting back to them, or did they have to keep bugging that vendor? And what are their levels of customer support? A lot of our customers like that we don't charge anymore for our customer support and that we're there to help them every step of the way. Some vendors will charge extra and a hidden fee. And then our clients also said that having the ability to have as many different sample types and as many different data fields that they need really helps support their unique laboratory needs. And then finally, they said the ease of use and how fast they could get onboarded really assured them that their lab would be supported. So that's something that we'll kind of be focusing on today. And looking at our poll results, it looks like the vast majority of us are really interested in that sample tracking and freezer management, but we also have some folks that are interested in workflow management and test assay results. So we'll be sure to cover all of those sections in Sample Manager and supporting you all. And so just a little bit more background about LabKey. We started over 20 years ago with part of the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center here in Seattle, Washington of the United States. And we're experts in scientific data management. A lot of us were actually scientists. So we're scientists building software for scientists. We've partnered with a wide range of clients from academia, pharma biotech to government research. And we work very closely with all of our clients to make sure that they have that support that they need. With Sample Manager, we help import your historical data. We can get your system configured the way you want it, and we can help train every user that's going to be using that software. We also take your feedback very seriously and continuously grow our software based on the feedback that you provide. So we can make sure that our monthly updates will be getting all the support that you need. So when we look at Sample Manager, we really focus on three main pillars to kind of help prevent those horror stories. And that's usually the requirement a lot of our prospects have. So our first priority is data integrity. We want to make sure that our data is not going to be accidentally deleted or accidentally altered in ways that can happen like in spreadsheets. So we make sure that we're capturing data you need associated with your samples and make sure that it's accurate. We have different data fields to make sure your data goes into the correct field. Like if you have a date field, it should only allow date answers. And we also have a very robust audit log, which leads to sample traceability. So this helps kind of get away from those inaccuracies found in spreadsheets where it's very difficult to audit that information and making sure everything stays as it should. And not only can you track what changes have been made to your samples, but we can also track exactly where it is in storage, where the sample came from, and where it is in that life cycle. So is it available? Is it out for testing? Is it shipped out to another facility? We'll be able to track that. And that way you don't have to spend hours searching for a single sample if it's lost in the freezers. You'll be able to easily find it in Sample Manager. Then there's our system flexibility. We want to make sure that Sample Manager adapts to the way you work and not the other way around. Today, we'll be looking at a system that's set up for a more clinical sample management, but keep in mind that our system is very flexible and very configurable. We can work with a variety of different sample types, such as dirt, rocks, blood, plants, you name it. And you can also have as many different data fields associated with these sample types as you need. So as we get into the demo, we'll cover the main features of Sample Manager, which are divided into two different tiers, depending on what your needs are. Our starter tier has storage management, sample and lineage tracking, querying and reporting, and a full audit trail. And our professional tier has everything with starter, as well as assay data management, an electronic lab notebook, workflow management, data partitioning, and API access. Depending on what your needs are, we can help make sure you pick the right tier. And then if your needs do change over time, it's super easy to upgrade from starter to professional or even more complex system like LabKey LIMS, clinical data management systems, or even our SDMS scientific data management system. So we'll go into all these different features and we can see how they'll help you out. And then after this demo, we'll reach out to schedule a more personalized demo. We can answer questions that are more specific to your use case. I'll try to get through all of the questions that I can today, but maybe you have something that I didn't answer. We can also get a guided trial set up so we can really help you explore Sample Manager and see how it would work for your laboratory. And then finally, we also have another webinar called The Hidden Costs of Spreadsheets in the Lab. So this is going to be a great way to see how spreadsheets can be hurting your organization. Now, as we get through the demo, hopefully you'll see how we can prevent your own lab horror stories, and feel free to ask any questions as we go through the demo. All right. So today, if I can move my Zoom controls, this is my homepage of Sample Manager, and this is where I can get a basic overview of everything that's going on in my lab. I can see all of our different sample types as well as their different statuses. So I can see I have around 10,000 DNA samples that are available and around 19,000 samples that have been consumed. These are all configurable, so you can name whatever sample types you have, from PBMC to environmental samples, whatever it is that you need. And you can also customize the types of statuses that you have. So if they're available in testing and shipment, whatever it is you need, we can support. We also have a wide range of storage units that we can kind of provide. We'll show the recently opened ones so you can get to what you're working on very quickly. And then the ones maybe you're not in too much because that's in part of another team, it'll be towards the bottom. In these storage units, you can also see the breakdown of different sample types here, as well as how much space is available. So if that freezer does go offline, you can see how much space you have inside each freezer and quickly move it from one location to another. I also have a list of all my workflow jobs. These are tasks that have been assigned to me, so I can quickly click on it, see what samples I need to work on, and what steps need to be taken. When I scroll up, I also have a list of my most recently opened electronic lab notebooks. So if I'm taking notes, I can click on whatever I was working on very quickly and get going from there. To really navigate through Sample Manager, we have our dashboard. This is going to bring down a list of our different folders. This is how we partition our data. So if I'm assigned to Project Alpha, I'll be able to see all samples assigned to that project. But if I don't have access to Project Beta, I wouldn't see what's assigned there. We also have a list of our different source types. This is really where our samples are coming from. If they're coming from a specific client, project, study, you'd be able to kind of figure that out, or even a specific patient. We have a list of all of our different sample types, all of our different assays or tests that we're running, and then a list of our storage units. So right now, let's go ahead and look at our blood samples. And again, these can be customized to be named whatever it is that you need. This could be a rock, plant, blood, whatever it is. When I click on this specific sample type, it's going to bring me a list of all of our different data fields associated with the sample type. This really allows us to customize and enter in information that's really important to us. So if you want a draw date, you can have it. But if you want something like a centrifuge date or a time that's frozen, you can have it as well. Or even free text fields, drop-down options, whatever you need, it can be here. In these grids, you can also filter through the different sets of data. So if I want to see all my blood samples that failed a quality control test, I can quickly bring that up and add more filters. As you can see, I'm already filtering through some fields here. Whenever you see these grids in Sample Manager 2, you can always download this into a CSV, Excel, or TSV file. So if you're needing to share this information or you're shipping out a lot of samples, you can quickly get that information out. From this grid, you can also edit your samples either individually in grid, or if they're all having the same information changed, you can update them in bulk. You can derive samples or create child samples through an aliquot or derive it to another sample type, like if we're going from blood to PBMC. You can assign them to a specific test, add them to storage, or add them to a workflow job. And then you can also add samples to Sample Manager, either adding it manually through the UI, or you can import it through like a CSV or Excel file. And if you have professional, you can also use our API to communicate with other systems. For right now, let's go ahead and look at my specific blood sample, 4733. This just has a lot of data with it, so I like to show it during our demos. When I click on this sample, I can see exactly where it is in storage. I could have also seen that in my grid view. I can see how many aliquots or child samples that this sample has. These are kind of like clones. And I can see how many of these are available. I can see how many notebooks the sample's referenced in, and then I can also see its metadata. One thing that I think really sets us apart and a lot of our clients really like is our lineage view. This provides a visual of how this sample is related to everything else in my system. So I can see that this blood sample came from this specific mouse and that this specific mouse is part of this specific study. So we're tracking where our samples are coming from. But then I can also see what child samples this has. So I can see that this sample has these 4 aliquots, which are pretty much clones of the sample. But then I can also see what derivatives this has. So we're going from one sample type to another, and these samples might have different information than their parent. So this is a great way to click on these child samples or where the sample is coming from and getting some more information. I can also click on the specific mouse and see all of the samples that came from it. This could be other, like a client, see all the samples from a specific client or from a specific patient. And of course, if your project client has a lot of samples, the visual gets a little bit messy, but we have this tab called samples where you can see every single sample that came from the specific mouse or specific patient or specific study. Going back to my original sample, I can also click on the Assays tab, see what results this has. from all of these different tests that we've ran on it. I can also see that on the client view and see all of their test results as well. I can go to my workflow jobs and see what tasks have been completed with it and what jobs it's associated with it. And one thing that a lot of our clients also likes is our sample-centric audit log. This allows me to see everything that's happened to a sample from the moment we registered it all the way to when we consume it. So this is a very easy way to do investigations for like an individual sample if it's gone missing, so you can kind of determine what's happened to it. And one thing that really sets us apart is even after the sample has been discarded or consumed, we'll hold on to this view. So months later down the road, if you need to do an investigation, you can definitely do that. Going back to my overview, I'm going to go ahead and click on where the sample is in storage. When I do that, it's going to show me the exact freezer, shelf, rack, box that it's in. I can also see the location this freezer's in. So if you have like a freezer farm or a bunch of different rooms with different freezers, you can know exactly where you should be going, so you don't have to go looking from freezer to freezer. I can also see the exact row and column that the sample's located in inside this box. That way I know exactly where to be looking at it. But I can also see all of the other samples that are inside this box and get some more information on these samples. I can see their metadata here, so I don't have to go back and forth between screens. From this view, as well as the sample grid view that we saw earlier, I can check out my samples. I'm just going to say for my demo, this is going to go in my audit log. When I do that, this space is now going to be highlighted pink. This means that it's reserved. We're assuming that once you're done checking out that sample, you're going to put it back in to that specific location. So that way people can't fill in that spot with a different sample. If I want to free up this spot, I'll just move it somewhere like a workbench or somewhere else so someone else can check in another sample here. But let's say I'm done with my experiment. I'm going to go ahead and check it back in. It's going to ask me how much I used when I checked it out. I'm going to say 5 mils. And it's going to ask me if I want to increment my freeze thaw count. And I do. So I'm going to keep it checked. And then I'm going to just put in my reason for checking it back in. Again, this is all going to go through my audit. When I check in my sample, I can see that it automatically reduced the amount from 25 to 20, and it increased my freeze thaw count. This allows us to keep more up-to-date information than we could with our spreadsheets. We can also move these samples from one location to another or discard them. And you can do it with multiple samples all at once. You can click and drag which samples you need, select sporadic ones throughout your box, whatever works best for you. One thing that's also really cool is that you can move an entire storage unit from one shelf to another or one freezer to the next. And you can do like entire shelves too. So if that freezer goes offline, you can quickly update your information within the software. But let's say I am now going to be running an assay or a whole workflow on this entire box. Usually we're shipping out boxes of samples. So let's say every single one of these samples needs to be shipped out from our laboratory to somewhere else. What I can do, I can go to this box manifest that I have in this specific screen. I can select whichever samples I need to work on, or if I'm going to work on all of them, I'll just select them all. And then I can assign them to a brand new job. So these are workflow tasks that we've created based off of it, like an SOP template. So let's say I'm going to be testing these samples as well as shipping them out. I'm going to go ahead and choose this template, and it's going to automatically fill in the information that I might need, like my courier company, let's say FedEx, as well as a tracking number. Now, I don't have the tracking number just yet, but I can fill it in later. I can also assign who the job owner is going to be. So I'll go ahead and be the job owner, but I'm going to go ahead and notify Hannah so she knows what's going on with these tasks. I can set start dates and due dates for these, as well as the priority level. Then I can go and look at what my tasks are. These are all things that we've set up, so we know exactly what we should be running on these specific jobs. And these are kind of based off of our SOPs. And then I can double check to make sure these samples are what I want to work with. When I'm done finished creating this specific job, I can see what tasks need to be completed and if I am the task owners. You can also assign individual task owners in case one tech is assigned our CBCs and then another tech's assigned our chemistries. So this is a great way to track those complicated workflows or to track information that's going to be true across a bunch of samples, such as shipping them out in a single box with that tracking number. I can go to the individual tasks, mark that I've completed them, and it'll help me go through all of these different fields. And then when I'm going into this task, I can also see what samples I should be working with and where they're stored in Sample Manager. And then once I have my assays, I can also check what my test results are for this specific workflow. So this is a very easy comprehension way to kind of track what our jobs are and what we need to do. And once you get assigned those tasks, it'll populate right here. And then you'll also receive an email that you have a task pending. So if you have any questions kind of regarding that, let me know. Feel free to kind of ask questions in the chat. I'll kind of check them periodically as I go through it. But this is kind of a great way to register your samples, see where they're coming from, put them in storage, and assign them to a workflow task. Now, let's say I have my workflow task, my samples are registered. I want to kind of create some notes for my experiments. We can also support this through our electronic lab notebook. With these, we can create job templates. So if you want to enter in data the same way every single time, usually labs have different worksheets they want to follow. You can do this here. And what's really cool about our ELN is that it's integrated with our data. So you can tag specific patients, clients, or studies, or you can tag assays, workflow jobs, or even individual samples. And with Sample Manager, it's very easy to pick up. It's very similar to social media where you type in the @ sign and tag whatever that sample may be, like our blood 4733. With our ELNs, you can have a table of contents right here, and this is going to be each one of these individual sections. And if you have a really long ELN, you can click on where you want to go, and it'll jump you to that location. Or you can see where your samples are being referenced and kind of go to where it's being referenced in the ELN. With these, you can have inline images, charts, graphs. It's a way for me to show off my cat because I think he's really cute and I like to brag about him. But then we also have inline tables that you can have, attachments, different comments. This is a great way to work in a collaborative setting because multiple people can work on a single notebook. And then once it's done, you can submit it for review for someone to approve it and sign off with their electronic signature. This also helps with a lot of places of compliance. So this is kind of how our notebooks work. You can kind of filter through them if you want to search for a specific notebook and get some more details there. Now that all of our samples are registered in Sample Manager, they're all in storage, they're in various places of the workflow, we need a great way to kind of search for them. And there's a few ways we can do that in Sample Manager. If you're using barcodes, you can scan those samples for their barcodes and we'll pull up that list of samples. If you know their IDs, you can search for them. But more often than not, you don't always know the ID and you don't always have a barcode. You want to search for a sample with specific properties. I know when I worked in the lab, this was a huge project I had to do to dispose of samples. I needed to search for all my samples that came from a patient with certain demographic information. Now with Sample Manager, you can use our sample finder to find these samples. So what took me well over a year for our project would have taken me just a few clicks to find the samples that I needed instead of having to go through Excel after Excel spreadsheets with that data. So here I just searched for all my samples that came from a female mouse, and it pulled up a list of every single sample that meets that criteria. I can further narrow down my search. So if I wanted to add, I want to find all my female mice with a bulb C strain, I could easily do that, and it's going to narrow down those samples. From here, I can look at more information regarding these samples. I can edit them, add them to that workflow, add them to storage, ship them out. Whatever it is I need to do, I can do it from here. So it's a much more streamlined process than using those spreadsheets. And then we kind of went into it, but we also have these folders so you can partition your data too. So if you only want certain number of texts seeing specific samples, you can definitely assign those samples to Project Alpha, Project Beta. And if you're shipping samples from one testing site to another, you can move those samples from one project to another as well. But if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. This is kind of a basic overview of Sample Manager that's more generalized for all of our attendees here. We can always schedule a more personalized demo to answer your questions as well. And you can always learn more about Sample Manager on our website. We have our Sample Manager tab here, which has a lot more information on our software and also has some more pricing information, but we can get you a more accurate quote as well. And also on here, you can hear testimony from our current clients through their user presentations, their webinars, publications, and whatnot. And then we also have kind of training tools to help people get onboarded with Sample Manager. We have this Exploring Sample Manager that has links to our video tutorials and documentation. And we can always get a guided trial set up where we import a portion of your data. It can be real, can be fake, so you have a better understanding of how Sample Manager can fit your lab's needs. But right now, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. So ask whatever questions you'd like. We can kind of help you out. So how accessible is the metadata encoded for a sample for downstream analysis, like with sequencing and proteomics? That's a great question. So a sample manager, we can actually customize our grid views to show information that came upstream. So if I want to see kind of more information about my samples and my test results, I can pull that from that sample ID. So if I need to know the sample type it is, when it was created, or anything else like that, I can do that. I could also pull in our ancestor, like our patient information for these very same grid views. So we can pull in that historical data. Would working with samples in a multi-well plate be pretty much the same as working with a freezer box of sample and workflow handling for your blood samples? Yes, it definitely is. So our boxes, our bags, our well plates, those are what we call terminal storage units. So it translates very nicely. You can name those whatever it is that you need and kind of customize it from there. Once a sample is discarded, how long does its record stay in LabKey? That's a great question. So I can pull up all my samples that have been discarded. So these are samples that haven't really been deleted. This is kind of what we recommend if you are actually kind of getting rid of different samples, you can mark them as consumed. And as long as I have all my search things kind of filtered correctly, you'd be able to pull these up. We don't delete this information. Now, if you do truly delete a sample, you'll still be able to view its records in our system-wide audit log and get more information there. Can we integrate electronic data capture in Sample Manager? So you may be able to, as long as that system is able to connect through our API. I can send out some more API information, but usually we're doing calls using things like R, Python, Java, whatever kind of language you want to use. And if it can import, export in like that tabular format, we should be able to support it. Are there tools to assist in the design and registration of a particular experimental sample? Uh, let's see, I'm just kind of reading it, so it's a longer one. Yeah, so there's different things that we can kind of do depending on what it is that you're needing. That actually might be kind of more of our LIMS question. So we also have LabKey LIMS that focuses more on the automation of it, whereas Sample Manager is more for kind of those basic experiments, but that's a great question. Let's see. How many users with the facility can have access to the software after purchase? Is there a maximum number? Does one need to get a license key for each person's PC? So Sample Manager is a cloud-based system. So basically you pay for however many users you need, and then we can do that. If you get more users, we can always upgrade to allow those users to have access to it. So because it is cloud-based, you can use it when you have that URL. If you need a more on-premises version, we can support that with LabKey SDMS, another one of our softwares. Yes, so as this question is asking, a lot of us are currently using Excel spreadsheets. Is it possible to directly load or integrate our Excel sheet into the system? How long should we schedule time-wise to set up the sample manager system before we can start working with it? That is a great question. So there's a couple of answers for that. You can definitely import those Excel CSV spreadsheets into Sample Manager. Now, without seeing that spreadsheet, we might need to clean it up a little bit to get it into a format that Sample Manager can read. We also offer these templates based off of how we set up your sample management system. But one thing that's really great about our onboarding process is that if you have it in those CSV Excel spreadsheets, we can actually do that process for you. We can clean it up, we can import it for you. So that really helps reduce the amount of time we spend onboarding and implementing that new system. Usually our clients see Sample Manager getting fully set up with getting your server set up, your data structures, and importing historical data and training new users within 4 to 8 weeks, opposed to a lot of other Loom system that takes months, if not over a year, to get onboarded with. Now, a lot of that does depend on how much data there is, what your timelines are, and how often you can meet to get that process going. Let's see. Would you be happy to set up a meeting to focus on optimizing workflows and set up for specific cases? Yeah, most definitely. Feel free to set up a private demo with me, we can go into that. It always helps to kind of know beforehand what those workflows set up, but I'd be more than happy to do that. And that's also what our guided trials are, is to really customize those workflows, how your data structured, so you can kind of trial it before you purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and go through more of these questions. These are great ones. Thank you so much for asking them. And if I don't fully answer your questions, always feel free to email me or schedule another one or another demo live. Let's see. And then a lot of questions we usually get is, what does our customer support look like? We can fully help you get onboarded with Sample Manager, getting those structures set up. We help train all those users. We also provide a bunch of different resources to make sure you are successful with Sample Manager. And once everyone's fully onboarded and implemented, we have a ticket system where you basically email help@labkey.com. So it's going into a shared inbox and we respond very quickly, and we don't charge any extra for that. So all of our support is complimentary with the system. And if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll stick around for a little bit longer, but we'll go ahead and email you after this to get a demo set up if you'd like, so we can kind of speak more one-on-one specific to your use case. That's also where we can help get guided trials set up and whatnot. We're always happy to kind of help out in any ways that we can. And if you're hopping off, thank you so much for joining. It's always great to kind of speak with you all. It's great to see some familiar faces here. Always here to kind of help out. Feel free to ask any questions. And again, if we don't answer it, feel free to email me, lancel@labkey.com. All right. And then, of course, if you want more resources, our website's a great place to go, where you can look at case studies, how our current clients are using Sample Manager, hear from them with their user presentations. We always like to hear from our clients, and we work very closely with them all. So we always want to make sure we can help support you in the best ways possible. And if you think you need something that's a bit more complicated than Sample Manager, such as generating reports, having more data analysis, feel free to look at some of our other systems like LabKey LIMS, Biologics, our scientific data management system, and our clinical data management system. But it's been great speaking with you all, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. Feel free to reach out with anything else that you might need. And then looks like we have another question. Do you have an offline version, PC version instead of the URL platform? Yep, that's part of our Sample Manager, or not Sample Manager, SDMS, which includes everything with Sample Manager and allows you to be on-prem instead of in that cloud environment. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great weekend. Happy Halloween.